Okay, I think we're ready to start. Good afternoon to all of our attendees. Welcome to ULA Fall Workshop Virtual Edition. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Azra Basic, Adult Services Librarian at the City Library and a Continuing Education Committee member. I'll be responsible for hosting today's presentation, and it is my pleasure to welcome Wendy Annas, who is the Teen Librarian at the American Fork Library for 2 years now. She staffs the reference desk and loves to plan and host events at the library. Since she was a little girl, her happy place has been between the covers of a book, preferably on a beach. She has super eclectic taste and will read pretty much any genre, so recommend your favorite book, she'll probably read it and then want to talk to you about it too much. She believes that reading and libraries can change lives. They help us develop empathy, resilience, and creativity. They build intellectual and emotional intelligence, and they give us a soft place to land when the real world gets to be too much, which seems to be all the time lately. I could not agree more, Wendy. These are Wendy's words. Libraries also sometimes offer programming that can change lives for better, which is what she hopes to help facilitate today in her session. And the session is Aware AF, Mental Health Resources and Classes. In this session, Wendy will educate us on how to get information about developing regular mental health awareness classes for teens and adults and expanding our book collection on mental health and related topics. She will teach us how to collaborate with local therapists, some possible grant opportunities for funding, and the classes and the book lists she started her program with. This presentation will be recorded and available on the ULA website. If you are interested in the closed caption, please click on the closed caption icon on your control panel window. And at the end of the webinar, or actually Wendy expressed her wish for all of you. If you have any questions, please feel free to type your question into the chat section or raise your hand. Just click on the icon raise hand and then I will unmute you, or I believe you can unmute yourself as well, and ask question. If we ran out of time, you are welcome to reach out to Wendy to her email, wannas@afcity.net. I will have her email typed in the chat section as well. And now, here's our special guest, Wendy. Please take over.
Thank you, Azra. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Azra said. I do love sessions that have more discussion kind of feel. So any questions or comments you have as we go, I think that you can unmute yourselves now. They had that on a different setting before, but if for some reason you have a question and you can't unmute yourself, if you raise your virtual Zoom hand, Azra can unmute you, or you're welcome to type your questions into the chat and ask her to ask them for you. I told her she can jump in and ask. I'll stop a couple of times for questions if you have any during my presentation, and we'll also have a little bit of time, hopefully, for Q&A at the end. Also, I just wanted to point out that for some reason I thought that my PowerPoint would be available along with this video through ULA. And so some of my resources and links in here are just hyperlinks. So if you would like specific information for the resources, or if you just want a copy of my whole PowerPoint, if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to send it to you so that you can get all the information. And there's my contact info down on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I think Azra also put it in the chat, and I'll have it again at the end. So just want to make sure, I want you to get all the information I have, so and feel like you can say whatever you want to say while we're talking. So I'm pretty passionate about this topic, as you will probably soon see. So hopefully today you guys will leave here with some inspiration, as well as all the resources you need to make information available for your patrons. Because as librarians, especially as public librarians, we know firsthand that there is definitely a need for much better mental health services in our communities, and we all have stories to prove it. Just within the last few weeks, we had a guy, I was sitting at the reference desk, who came in a full onesie, zip up, fuzzy chicken suit, who went and just sat down at a computer and proceeded to unzip his chicken suit to his waist. So any patrons who were newly coming in, it looked like he was sitting there naked, which I'm not sure if that's better or worse than sitting there in a chicken suit. But and we all have stories like these, and some of them are funny and a lot of them are not funny at all. But as librarians, we do have some pretty compelling anecdotal evidence, I think, that mental health is a concern in our communities, but there are plenty of statistics to back up our stories as well. Here are a couple of links to some source material studies that have been done recently about the state of mental health in Utah. The the United Health Foundation puts out a yearly statistical reports on health in all the states, called America's Health Rankings. And in their most recent report, Utah is ranked 45th out of 50 for highest suicide rates. We're pretty far down there. Also in this, there's a study that was published last year from the Ken C. Gardner Policy Institute at the U that has some pretty extensive data on Utah's mental health systems as well. Here's some infographics from these two reports. We hear a lot of stats, I think, about suicide in Utah, especially suicide among teenagers and our LGBTQ community. But I was interested, if not surprised, to see that we are much, much higher than the national average in pretty much every different demographic. You can see on this infographic that the dark, it's kind of small for some people, but the dark bars are Utah's suicide rates per 100,000, and the lighter is the national average. And you can see that it doesn't matter male, female, ethnicity, and all age groups were quite a bit higher than the national average here. Here's an infographic too from the study from the U that has kind of just a snapshot of some of their big takeaways from their study. One of the ones that I was especially concerned about that I'd never thought about was that more than half of adults and 60% of youth ages 12 to 17 who have some sort of mental illness or depression did not receive treatment or counseling for it in our state. So clearly there's a need here. Several years ago, there was an article in the Southeastern Librarian Journal that was addressing underserved populations, that talked about how public libraries connect with a disproportionately high percentage of people who are considered low income. And there's also quite a bit of research, like these two articles from JAMA and Psychiatric Times. JAMA is a journal put out by the AMA, the American Medical Association, both of which talk about how low-income populations are statistically at much higher risk for mental illness, as well as much less likely to have access to mental health care, unsurprisingly. And so those two things combined make it pretty clear that we have a unique opportunity in libraries to provide information to people who would not otherwise have that access to it. In other words, we can make a huge difference in our communities by offering opportunities and materials to promote mental health awareness in our libraries. Peter Reichart, who is the president at the Utah Foundation, They released a report called Getting to Tomorrow, addressing suicide in Utah and the mountain states. But he talked about how we really have got to have engagement across the whole of society, that addressing suicide especially is an all hands on deck effort to improve mental health. So clearly the library could and should be part of that effort. Although I don't want to say that acute mental illness or underserved populations are the only things that we can help, because everybody can benefit from having more information on mental health. So Christine Meltier, who is the medical director at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, talked about how it really all goes back to what do we need to be teaching people about how to manage kind of normal life stresses, because anybody can experience those things. So acute mental illness or situational mental or emotional distress, it doesn't matter. We have a unique opportunity to provide help to people who need help. And I feel like that's what we do best at the library. So the question then becomes, where do we start? What do we do? So I didn't want to spend too much time talking about stats, but I did want to make sure that you guys have information that you can use in case you need to convince somebody else, i.e. get financing, get money for things that you want to do at the library. So today I want to talk about mostly about programming and developing collections, and also what other sources of information we can make available at the library. So starting with programs, I just wanted to talk about how to start a mental health awareness program at your library. We're going to talk about how to plan them, how to use local therapists as a resource, and scheduling and figuring out what topics you should start with. So planning, you just kind of start tentatively like any other program that you're starting. You look at your budget first, figure out what kind of money you have in your current programming budget. If you are going to need to look for money in other places and from donations or grants, you want to look at your schedule. How often do you want to do this? Do you want to do it weekly for a month, monthly for 6 months, twice a month? What do you have time for? What do you have space for? Are you going to do it with teens and adults together, or are you going to separate teens and adults and have a different teacher? How much are they going to want to be paid for doing it? How are you going to publicize? Find a catchy name. I thought I found the best name ever for mine, but got a little bit shut down. And so that's why my session today is called Aware AF, because I'm the librarian in American Fork, and I thought it was funny, but I get that not everybody thinks I'm funny, I guess. Anyway, and so you start just the same as you do with any other program, kind of sketching out what you think you want it to look like. And then once that is done, your very best resource is going to be local therapists. So I had a couple of friends who were practicing therapists, and I also cold called practices in my area and found a handful of therapists who are willing to either meet with me or talk on the phone. And then you just want to pick their brains about everything. Once you're to the point where you're deciding to look for therapists, if you don't know therapists who will say, hey, this guy or this girl, might want to help out, or talk to them, or call this practice or whatever, then there are lots of different kinds of therapists who might be a resource for you. You can call psychologists, you can call psychiatrists, social workers, marriage and family therapists. All of those guys can help kind of inform your planning. And also talking to them as you're talking to them it'll give you a sense of their personalities and whether or not you think they would be a good fit for actually teaching classes and interacting with people in the library about it. So here are some questions that I just put together that you want to start asking them. Talk to them about what, first of all, they think your immediate community's most pressing or most common mental health needs are, what kind of topics they think it would be most helpful for you to be talking about at the library. Ask them what kind of books they regularly recommend to their clients. It's super helpful if they're recommending books and you actually, you know, have them in the library. Talk to them about what topics they feel like people might have a hard time talking about in person, but maybe they would read a book about, and make sure that you're putting those kinds of books in your collection. Talk to them about whether or not they would have time or would be willing to teach at the library, which topics they would like to teach, how often. The most uncomfortable part of that is probably going to be talking to them about what they would want to be paid. I highly recommend you pay your therapist. You're going to get much better quality if you do. However, having said that, we pay the therapists that teach at the library much less than they would make, you know, in an hour of actually, you know, practicing therapy. We pay our therapists $100 per class, which I think is kind of a good medium place where they're still getting something, but you're not breaking the bank by trying to do it. Also, you might want to ask them if they can't do it, if they have any colleagues that they feel like would be a good fit for doing that. And then just ask them in general, what else? Because they might have ideas or thoughts about it that haven't even occurred to us or wouldn't occur to us as somebody not in that field. So once you talk to your therapist, get a lot of information, you are going to want to start nailing down who your teachers are going to be for which dates, what dates you're going to do it, and what topics you're going to want to talk about on those dates. So this is a list here of the topics that we kind of started with. And then, or not that we started with, some of these are ones that we started with. All of these are either ones that we have taught at our library or that we're planning to teach at our library. And then you kind of make the list and then start pairing topics with dates that you think might work well for them. For example, anxiety, we thought, oh, April and May has a lot of anxiety-inducing things going on. You've got tax deadlines, you've got graduations, you've got kids moving away from home, you've got transitions from school to summer. So maybe April or May would be a good time. Finals for kids would be a good time to talk about anxiety. Maybe addiction is a good one to talk about in January when people are, you know, making goals and trying to change habits. We thought conflict resolution and dealing with manipulative or shaming people would be good topics for during the holidays when we're spending time with extended family that we don't always agree with. We've taught lots of classes where our therapists have taught tools that can apply to a whole bunch of different mental health issues. Anyway, so I won't go through the whole list, but just so you get an idea of, you know, how to start plugging in what you think would work when. We also, at the end of each series, generally do a Q&A session with the therapist where we will put a Google form online and a box with papers at all of the other classes so that people can submit questions that they might not feel comfortable asking in person, but also the therapists are willing to have people come and ask questions in person. And then at that one, they just address all the questions that people have asked, which has been super successful as well. We have also tried to have incentives for people to come. The first series of classes that we had, we did it as a series, and so I think we gave away for the first, I think 12 people or something who registered, we gave these mental health awareness journals. Here are some links to Amazon for a few things that we have used as incentive gifts. Some of them are kind of expensive, so we gave them away as if you register and come to all of the classes in the series, then you'll get, this journal and pen at the end or whatever. For some of them, we just did mental health awareness pens and pencils. Those are pretty cheap. One of the things that we did at the end of our first series was I made just some little signs, just little reminders of things that we had talked about in classes, and just bought some dollar store frames and gave them little framed quotes of things. And they are by no means amazing or professional, but I did put a link so that you can access those if you are interested in that. So just before we move on, that's just a little bit of an overview of programming. Does anybody have any questions yet about how to structure programming, or where to start there, or anything about programming? Anybody want to unmute themselves and get yourself out there? Okay, like I said, we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So if you think of something, or if you want to just email me and ask later, that is fine too. So moving on to collections, it's super important to have, current good information in your mental health care collections. You also want to figure out how much of your budget you have for a collection refresh. Again, get recommendations from the therapist or therapists who you're collaborating with about books that they think you should add to your collection. Weed out outdated books. And I tried really hard when I was asking my therapist to give me lists, and then kind of consolidated that down to what books do we not have in the library already from this. I tried to cover a wide range of topics and even genres, that all of the books that I bought were not just nonfiction. I bought some graphic novels and some memoirs and even a couple of children's books to add to the collection. And also, I would say definitely consider a permanent display of mental health books. This is one of my favorite success stories of our new mental health awareness push at our library. When I first got all of the books that I'd ordered, and they all were cataloged, and you can see over here on the left, this was what my initial display looked like. I just wanted to get them out on shelves. And this was kind of by a door where people, almost everybody who came upstairs to the adult and young adult sections of the library walked past this door. So I wanted to put it up where it would be seen. And so I put it up on a Friday afternoon, and was not back in the library until the following Tuesday afternoon. So 3 days later, it makes me tear up thinking about it. 3 days later, this is what my display looked like. There were 6 books left out of the 36, I think, was what was on my original display. So clearly there was a need. And also it's something that if you put your display in a pretty heavily trafficked area, then people won't necessarily head back to the 300s and look for what they're looking for, or the 100s or 600s in some cases. But if they walk by a display that has a book on it about something that's a concern for them, they'll pick it up and check it out with the rest of their stuff. And get that information will get to them when it wouldn't have otherwise, really been on their radar to check out a book about it. So I highly recommend putting up a display. And when the display gets sparse, I fill it in with other books that weren't, on my initial list of ones that I bought, but other books that are in our collection. And our mental health awareness display has significantly increased our circulation of mental health books at the library. Just one little tip, you might want to check the books periodically if you have a display. For business cards, there may be some enterprising life coaches who decide that's a great way to look for clients is by sticking their business cards into books. So that's happened a couple of times at our library, and we've had to, pluck them out. So I did make a Google Doc of with the list of the new books that we bought in our collection, plus a handful of the ones from the therapist list that we already had at the library. I'm sure there are more that I could add to that list, but it's a place to start anyway if you would like access to the list of books that we started with. And I guess I should stop really quickly and see if anybody has any questions about collections. That was a pretty fast overview. Okay, moving on. So there are just a few more things about information availability. Obviously, the library is where a lot of patrons have access to computers and where they get on the internet to look things up. And so giving patrons resources on how to tell if online information is legitimate is really a good idea anytime, but especially for health information. There's so much out there that's just not true, that is just people trying to make money. There is a really great information page on the National Institute of Health website about how to evaluate health information on the internet that might be useful. It's not super graphic heavy or user friendly. It's just pretty much a written list, which I've been meaning to, kind of consolidate a little bit, but all the information is there if that's something you want to turn into a pamphlet or just stick out somewhere to make available to your patrons. That would probably be useful. The NIH also has this really great resource of a list of brochures and fact sheets about mental health that almost all of them come in Spanish and in English, and you can order them for free from the NIH, or you can download the PDFs and print them to display. That's my next big hope, that I'm going to get bookshelf for my book display to go on with display on the ends, on the end caps for the pamphlet. So those are some other really great resources that you might want to make available to your patrons. So what probably most of you guys are here for is, how in the world do we pay for this? Especially if you're paying therapists to do it. Sometimes you'll find a therapist who is incredible. I mean, most therapists really are philanthropists at heart. They are so generous and they want to give, which makes me want to pay them more. But you're going to have to pay for books. You're going to have to pay for everything, like you do anything at the library. So there are several places you're going to look for funding in order to start a mental health awareness program at your library. Obviously, you can think about your current programming budget. You can look at other budget contributions. If you have a Friends of the Library who might contribute. A lot of local businesses really are very mental health, big mental health proponents. And so, talk to the banks, talk to doctors' offices, talk to who, see the need as much as we do. Talk to therapist practices, local charity groups. Put together maybe a single sheet of information about the need in our areas, and maybe write a grant or two. So I wrote a grant, which is how we started our program initially. It was the first grant I had ever written. So it's far from being anything polished or professional, but I got my money, so it worked somehow. And I'm also happy, I did not put it in the PowerPoint, but I'm also happy to share a link to the grant that I wrote as well, if you want to access any of the information that I had in there to help you out. But here are a few links to legitimate organizations who have awarded grants for similar projects or have grants that are currently available. Most of these organizations also have grant writing resources on their sites that they talk about. The ALA just barely sent out an email saying that they have money for small and rural libraries. So if that applies to you, get on that. The National Institute of Mental Health and the Network of National Libraries of Medicine both award grants for this kind of stuff all the time. Sometimes they even get together to do grants. The SAMHSA organization also gives out grants, and then the Network of National Libraries of Medicine has a list of other legitimate places that you can look for grants on their website as well. So that's a lot of great resources for where to look for money, and they love to give it away if you know where to look for it. So highly recommend heading there. Just as a quick caveat, there are people out there who are just trying to scam anybody, and you definitely want to make sure if you're applying for a grant that it is from a legitimate source. And then here are just a few tips for spotting scams. If somebody contacts you saying that you were awarded a grant that you didn't apply for, that's a pretty good tip off that you should be skeptical about it. If they're asking you for any sort of fee, grant applications are almost always free. If you're asked for a fee to apply or even just to learn about grants, there's a good chance it's a scam. Checking out what agency the grant is from. If they are from the Federal Grants Administration, there's no such office, so that's a scam. Just if you don't know the organization that you're applying to, a quick Google search or Better Business Bureau check is definitely in order. Just make sure everything's above board. Also, if they ask you for bank account info or personal or company ID, then a good tip is just to ask them for that request in writing. And if they do, then great. They probably will eventually, if you get the grant, need your organization's tax ID code. And so they'll request that from you in writing. And if you ask them to request it in writing and you never hear from them again, then you just know you dodged a bullet. So all of those ways, go out there and look. There are also some organizations like websites where they say, fill out this information and pay this fee, and then we'll disseminate it to hundreds of places where you could get a grant. Those are generally not legitimate either. You really have to do a little bit of legwork and apply for each grant individually on your own most of the time. So I guess in summary, sometimes things happen in our communities that we just really don't have any control over and that are heartbreaking for us. And we see that all the time in public service, but mental health awareness is definitely not one of those things. We can do something about this. We can make a difference for our communities and for our patrons. And also being part of something that feels so important and worthwhile is really great for our own mental health. And so I highly recommend it. It has been so rewarding and fulfilling for me to make this happen in our library. It feels really great when I feel like people are getting help that they need. So that's all I have. Please let me know if you would like my PowerPoint with all of the links to specific information. And I guess I'll just throw it out for any questions anybody has and wrapping up.
Thank you, Wendy, very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
We do have one comment from Rachel Cook from the State Library. She says that the State Library has grants that could fund things like this as well. So,
oh, great. Good to know.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? I hope you guys feel inspired, and hopefully you feel armed with good information to make this happen in your libraries. It really has been so great in our libraries. Felt so good. My contact info is here again. I also put my cell phone here at the end if you have an urgent question that I'm only in the library 3 days a week right now. So most weeks anyway. And so if you don't get a response from an email right away, that's probably why. If you'd like one faster than that, feel free to text me or call my cell number, and I'm happy to share whatever information I have. Thanks so much, guys. I know that last session on a Friday is...
We do have a couple of questions.
Awesome.
There's first question from Maddie. Have these series and programs continued virtually throughout the pandemic?
Oh, great question. Yes. So what I did, we stopped since the library closed for a few months. We were not having them for the few months that the library was closed. But once we were all back in the library and doing our thing, we did a few virtual classes, and then we eventually moved, because I just feel like people get so much more out of in-person interaction. We did move to, we are lucky enough to have a big patio outside the library by the park, so we started having outdoor classes when we were back. And then now that it's getting colder, the last one, I actually brought my propane fire pits from home, and I did not ask the fire department or the city if I could do that. So who knows if they would have shut that down if I'd asked. But I did bring some gas fire pits, and so everybody could stay warm while we were outside. And so yeah, we definitely, and I felt like that was when we were closed, that was my biggest, I was so antsy, because I knew that this was something that people who were stuck at home in the middle of a pandemic, there's no better time to be giving people resources about anxiety or depression or family problems or whatever. I really was anxious to get back to that. And so yeah, we've done some Zoom and some outside meetings since we've been back. Good question.
Okay, and then we have a question from Sarah. What was the most accepted programming and most needed you felt worked out well for your community?
Oh, that is a good question too. I feel like, thinking through the classes that we've had, I feel like, first of all, I feel like the collection made a much bigger difference than I thought it would. Those books have stayed checked out all the time since they've been on that display. I have to replenish that display every few days. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've done. We did some classes on meditation and mindfulness that personally made a big difference. I've been meditating for years. And the way that the therapist taught meditation in these classes made a huge difference for me and helped me kind of shift the way I think about my meditation a lot. And a lot of the patrons who came were really inspired by that. Also, the question and answer with the therapist. I mean, that's just what you would do if you had the money or the resources to go to an actual therapist yourself. And so I feel like just having an open Q&A where people could submit questions and get things addressed in that, in that moment without having to pay anything for it from a professional was a really big deal too. And I feel like we have some really great therapists who have taught the classes for us. And as a happy bonus, I think that they have gotten quite a few clients who have come to their classes and asked questions and felt a rapport with them, and who have gone, okay, I didn't ever think I would go to a therapist, but now I have this person who feels like somebody I could trust. And so I think that has been a big help too, is just going, oh, therapists are just normal people who are willing to, talk to me about my issues. So I think that has helped a lot too. I don't know if that was a specific enough answer for you, but.
We have a question from Daniel. Did any of the programs not go so well?
Honestly, no. There have been a couple that haven't been super well attended, especially like the first one that we did on Zoom. I honestly think that by the time we were back in the library and we're Zooming, that people were kind of sick of Zoom because they were all working on the computer and doing school on the computer, and that's all they did all the time. So the first Zoom class coming back, but I don't think that had anything to do with topics so much as, you know, just that we had to do it online and people were kind of maxed out sitting at their computers. The only other hiccup I can think of is that in one of our classes, I'm pretty sure it was the first Q&A that we had, there was a guy kind of in the same vein as the business cards who had his own like natural healing practice, who came in and was kind of trying to interject himself into the discussion a little bit with the therapist, and trying to like, you know, give his own answers for things. And he clearly did not have a degree in what he was talking about. And so, you know, I just had to shut that down, you know, quietly. But other than that, I feel like it's gone really, really well. I feel like the people who show up, oh, one thing I should mention too is that since I had written a grant and I had written it for 9 classes, we had a specific 9 classes and did it as a series and advertised it as the whole 9, here are all the topics we're going to do, show up for, you know, all of them or whichever ones sound interesting to you. But since then, I've kind of been doing a month-to-month thing. You know, we'll advertise it a month ahead and then just doing individual topics, so people don't feel like they have to commit to coming to the whole thing or whatever. So you really can do it whatever way works for your library. But I think as I was talking to my therapists, the therapists who teach at the library, a couple weeks ago, we decided we wanted to kind of do the same thing again and kind of plan out the next several months so that people can kind of plan ahead and know what we're going to be having. I think when people have time to kind of get their heads around coming for something like that, it's helpful. So anyway, any other questions?
Yes, we have another question from Wanda. She says, I work with a suicide prevention task force for Canyon School District, representing the library as a part of a large coalition. Can I share with them, I assume, the presentation and the resources?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would love to send it to you. Of course, I'm more than happy to send you anything I have. I feel like this information, the more people it gets to who can make a difference, the better it is. If you will just shoot me an email, I would be more than happy to, or you can call me and I'll give you anything I have. Yeah, I'm happy for it to be shared wherever.
And we have a question from Cynthia. Have you had people who had more serious mental health issues that could be handled at a class? How did you help them find help?
You know, it's been interesting. I wondered about that when I was first doing this. And I really have not, we haven't had anybody who was in obvious extreme distress come to our classes. And I'm sure that, which is another reason that it's a really great idea to have trained professional therapists there teaching your classes, because they know a lot better about what to do in those sorts of situations to handle it in the moment. But we haven't had that issue at all. I have considered, as we have been promoting in different places, promoting, you know, through the library, but also promoting through the schools, possibly going to local shelters or places like that to promote that we have this going on at the library, just so we can reach more people. And I'm sure there's a possibility that that would happen more often if we were accessing, you know, we're doing our publicity at those sorts of places. Where people kind of have more acute issues, but we haven't had that issue so far at all at our library.
Okay, that was our last question from the chat section. Everybody, if you can think of any other questions after this session is done, please reach out to Wendy. She has her email up. And I just want to say thank you, Wendy, for answering the questions, and thank you for a really great presentation. It was a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Astra, and thank you for moderating too. That
Absolutely.
was super helpful.
We have another comment. What a great session. Thanks for all of this information. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. Great information. So yay, great job.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Enjoyed it. I would like to conclude this webinar with this, and thank you all for attending. We hope you had learned and enjoyed a lot, and until next year.
Thanks, guys.